Romans 9:21, right. Does not the potter have a right over the clay to make from the same lump one vessel for honorable use and another for common use? And the key to that verse, of course, is the one we mentioned earlier on. 2 Timothy 2:21 says that if you want to be a good piece of pottery, you have to cleanse yourself. So you're involved in this. It isn't a fait accompli that God has decided you've got to be a rotten potter and nothing you can do about it. You have a choice to cleanse yourself, according to 2 Timothy 2:21. So the other one is Exodus 9:12. The Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart. Absolutely, that's one side of the coin. But as Matt earlier said nicely, it says that Pharaoh hardened his heart. I see. That's the other side of the coin. God looked at Pharaoh and saw that Pharaoh was hardening his heart. It also says that God put up with Pharaoh very patiently. Well, was God just putting up with something that was inevitable? No. God exercised patience. And not only did Pharaoh harden his heart, but God hardened his heart too. That's two sides of the same coin. So that solves that one beautifully. It wasn't just a one-sided activity on the part of God. So eventually then we know the story that God had to deal with Pharaoh, but he dealt with him very patiently. He put up with him for a long time. Well, God is not putting up with something it is already decreed inevitably. So that would be the answer to that one. And then John 6:37. By the way, many evangelical tracts, I want to warn you, they will say, read the Bible, accept Jesus, and then start reading in John. What? Wait a minute. That's misleading. Don't start reading in John. Start reading in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. There's a tendency for evangelicalism to love the Gospel of John because you can manipulate it. You can knead it into various false shapes more easily than you can Matthew, Mark. So I would say you're going to receive Jesus and start reading in Mark chapter 1, the beginning of the gospel. They're not going to tell you to do that. So I throw that in as a key to watching what goes on out there. All right, here it is. John 6:37. All that the Father gives me will come to me, and the one who comes to me I will certainly not cast out. That's absolutely right. But nothing is said there about having no choice to do this. In fact, it says in John's gospel also that Jesus is going to call everyone to himself. I've forgotten the verse offhand, but I will call and invite everyone. That's in John, I've forgotten the chapter exactly. But so it's not a selective calling. God wants all to be saved and to come to a knowledge of the truth. If that verse is not clear, nothing would be clear. Romans 8:30, let's just look at that one. Those he predestined, he also called. Those he called, he also justified. Those whom he justified, he also glorified. All of those are past tenses. They actually haven't happened yet. God has not glorified us yet, but in his plan. But doesn't say there that God had to watch over every marriage from Adam and Eve to produce precisely a given person. Now, he could have done that. And here I would mention what's called open theism. There's a passage in Genesis where God says, watching Abraham, he says, now I see that you're going to be obedient. Does that imply that God didn't know before? That's entirely possible. What if God chooses not to know some things? What if he chooses to know other things? So there's nothing at all deterministic about exactly which marriages had to happen for thousands of years to produce a given person. Now, God can do that, and he may have. I'll leave that open. But predestination and foreknowledge are not necessarily the same thing.
And one comment of mine in regards to your open theism, since you brought it up, he could also be saying that he sees it kind of like you would say to your child, oh, now I see you got it too.
Yep.
So not necessarily that he didn't know, but it's a thought.
That's right.
So would anybody on the panel then like to comment on any of these verses that are on the screen that Anthony commented on, or the ones that weren't commented on?
I'll be happy to. Yeah, so the verse I think Anthony was searching for earlier was John 12:32. If
Yep.
I am lifted up from the earth, I will draw all peoples, or some versions don't say peoples, but all to myself.
Yep.
And so, yes, exactly as Anthony said, the Father uses the Son and his own influence to draw people to us. So when we look at John 6:44, and we see that no one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him, God's doing that. He's drawing. And we also need to recognize in John 6:45, the next verse, that Jesus says, therefore, there's a therefore, so you should always ask, what's the therefore, right?
Yep.
It's a conclusion statement. Whoever has heard and learned from the Father comes to me.
Yep.
So is the Father going to hear for you and he's going to learn for you? No, you have to hear and you have to learn, and then you're going to come to Jesus. So all of this, it's like Anthony said, there's two sides of the coin of this.
Yes.
James even echoes this in James 4:8. He says, draw near to God and he will draw near to you. Hey, that sounds like I have a responsibility to draw closer to God, and then he's going to draw. So there's two sides of the coin, exactly as Anthony said. And James concludes that verse with, cleanse your hands, purify your hearts. So all of these are extremely important to mention. I noticed Romans 11:25 was in there as well. And just briefly, just to touch on that one. Paul's saying, and this goes along with what Dan had said earlier, he doesn't want us to be ignorant of the mystery that they wouldn't be conceited, that they as being Gentiles, that a partial hardening had happened not to individual people, but to the nation of Israel, he says, until the full number of Gentiles has come in. So this is going broader picture to nations, Gentiles, Israel, not just the specifics.
Thank you, Matt. Dan or Barbara, would you like to add anything?
Tracy, I might just mention one thought as a footnote, but we think about this fellow Pharaoh. I think one good thing to keep in mind about Pharaoh is he wasn't like a really good guy and then God hardened his heart and made him bad. That would be predestination, that in the sense that people want to use that. I think Pharaoh was just really a bad guy. He was an awful fellow. God was patient with him, as Anthony mentioned. He worked with him. He spurned God and cared not for his fellow man. I think whatever God did with him, that was just. It was okay. So I think, it's just, he does not make a good example to point to of a person where God used his, no, he was already a bad guy and God just used him to accomplish his purposes.
Thank you for adding that. Barbara, do you have anything else to add?
I would just say that in Romans 11, it goes on to conclude that mercy is the end of this. In fact, it says that so that God could be merciful to all. I mean, that's his purpose in this, and it's wonderful. It's wonderful that that is God's purpose, rather than what we might hear from Calvinists.